Hello, everybody. Welcome to another one of Onondaga Audubon's bird identification series. This time we're going over shorebirds. I know they're not as popular as warblers, but they are definitely a very fun group. Also, if you're not a member, I highly recommend joining. It's only $15 a year, and you can sign up to become a member on onondagaaudubon.com. That money will go towards conserving birds in the local area. So it's very worth it. So consider that, please. So shorebirds are a group of birds that are not around here year round. They will pass through in the spring up to their breeding grounds, and then this time of year again, heading down towards their wintering grounds. So they're here for a very short time, which doesn't give you a lot of time to brush up on your ID. But let's get to the next slide. So for this presentation, we'll be going over points to look for when you're trying to identify these shorebirds, what species are found in this area, and where to find them. So like I said, most species are not around here year-round. There's a few exceptions like killdeer who will nest pretty much anywhere, parking lots. They're not very picky. We also have spotted sandpipers, like if you look at this map on the left, they have one of the most southern breeding ranges of our shorebird species, but they still have quite the long migration that they undertake every year. So they will breed anywhere up in the northern half of the United States and North America, and they will still migrate all the way down to most of South America. Other species, most of them, will be similar to the semi-palmated bluebird, where they are breeding in the high Arctic tundra. And then once they're done raising their young, they head south, and depending on the species, they will go as far south as Central America, all the way down to the southern tip of South America. And then we have extremes like the Bairds, who do nest the very tip of the Arctic tundra and then migrate all the way down to the southern end. And if you look at these species, you'll notice an interesting characteristic about them is their wing length. So typically when you're looking at any bird, wing length is not always a characteristic or field mark that you're looking at. But the shorebirds, that is a very important one to pay attention to because of this huge range in their migration patterns. So because of they're just migrating through, they're only using our area as stopover sites. So these are like Onondaga Lake and other areas that will have nice, favorable conditions for them to fatten up to continue their journey. So because they're not here for very long, you don't have much time to practice on them, but there is a couple other factors that make them a bit of a challenge. So just like we have our nice, bright, colorful warblers in the spring, they will molt into their more drab, basic plumage in this time of year in the fall. So shorebirds do that same thing. And so when you're seeing all these shorebirds, they could be in still their breeding plumage, they could be in their complete basic plumage, or they can be juveniles. So that leads to a huge range of appearances that they could be appearing as, which makes it hard to pinpoint feather tracks and plumage variations. So on top of that, most of them do look very similar. They're all shades of reds, browns, and grays. So these large field marks that you'll see in most passerines are not going to be very helpful with this group of species. So instead of looking at these major characteristics like blocks of color, you're looking for minor field marks for shorebirds. And on top of it, sometimes they're quite far off. So scopes are helpful, but if you're like me, I recently learned that the camera is great if you don't have a scope. Even a smaller one has a great zoom capacity that helps more than a binocular would in some cases. So where do you start when you're just learning about how to identify these shorebirds? So just start off by watching them. They may all look at first very similar, but over time you'll start to notice these differences in their characteristics, how they move, how they act, their size. And once you do that, then you can start narrowing down them to groups. Oh, this bird is hunts differently for insects than this bird. Oh, this one has a larger eye, so it could be a plover. Maybe it has long legs, so maybe it is a member of the Tringa family, which contains the yellow legs. Or maybe it's something that doesn't fit into those categories. So narrowing it down to a specific group can really help be a nice start to decide what species they are. And because they do look very similar, you want to rely on not just one characteristic. You want to use multiple little clues to piece together what the species is. And again, what makes it more difficult is you're really focusing on these minor details. Where does the bill look like? How long are their legs? How long are their wings? Over actual coloration. So, like I mentioned, when you're looking at and identifying shorebirds, you're using a lot different field marks and characteristics than you would. So while you may be looking for wing bars and all these other characteristics of a songbird, ones you're looking for shorebirds are probably different. Like you want these, look at these, the primary projections from their, from their wing feathers, how far they go past the tail. Do they have a nice bold supercilium? What does their beak look like? Is it straight? Is it down curved? Is it a big bill or little bill? But a lot of these colorations you'll see are going to be all the same. So these little minor field marks are the most important. So getting familiar with the basic anatomy of a little shorebird is very helpful. So these are kind of the 6 main characteristics you'd be looking for identifying a shorebird. Their size, you have anywhere from a whimbrel, willet, which are more rare in this area, but they do show up, especially if you're going around a Oneida Lake or Oswego area. Then you have anywhere down to the least sandpiper, which is the smallest sandpiper. Shape, you have either compact, like you'll see on plovers or some sandpipers, or more elongated, like the Tringa species I mentioned, the yellow legs, the solitary sandpiper. Color, again, is not as helpful, but the 2 colors you're going to be looking for is what their back color is. Is it more of a warm brown tone, or is it gray? And leg color is actually pretty important. Though sometimes it can be tricky because mud will get on their legs, and a species like the least, who has a yellowish leg, may appear black. Behavior is a great clue. If you see a little bird bopping along the shoreline with bopping its tail, it's most likely going to be a spotted sandpiper. And even different species forage differently. Range, knowing what birds are expected in your area can be helpful, but again, these species are very long distance migrants. So birds that are normally in even Europe can randomly show up. It's helpful, but you always have to be prepared for the unexpected. And sound can be helpful too. I'm only going to go over a little bit on that, mainly with regards to the yellow legs, but I will mention a little bit about that. So this is a nice handy guide that was put together by Birds Caribbean. Even though this is Caribbean shorebirds, most of these can be found at this time of year somewhere in central New York, whether that be Oswego, going out to Montezuma, or Onondaga County. So we have it anywhere from the little least, who's down over here, all the way up to the whimbrel, which is definitely more rare. Probably won't get much more American oyster catchers, but a good chunk of these can be seen. And it's important to learn how these birds compare in size to each other. So size, again, can be difficult to judge from a distance, but the best way to go about that is compare them to a species you do know. A lot of times there will be killdeers out in a field or on the shoreline, or even least. So if you know, oh, this bird is bigger than a killdeer and it has longer legs. Oh, it could be greater yellow legs. So just compare them to species you do know. And when you're scanning these large flocks of little peeps, what might stand out the most is when several might be a little tiny bit bigger, and that will definitely earn you a little bit more inspection to see what they could be. Could they be semi-palmated? Could they be a white round? So noticing those little bit size differences can be very helpful. Shape is another clue. If they are round and compact, they're probably going to be a little smaller species of sandpiper or plover. If they're long-legged, they could be a tringa, um, um, or a solitary, or one of these other oddball species. So shape also entails leg length, beak length. Do their do their primary feathers go past their tail? Long neck or short neck? And one of the most important clues, I think, is looking at the bill shape, because most of those, even the small little peeps, can be identified just by their bill shape alone. So things you want to pay attention to is the size. Is it a short little beak? Then most likely it's going to be a plover. Is it medium size, which is about half to not quite as large as their head? Could be some of the larger plover species like killdeer, American golden plover, black belly plover, or some of these sandpipers like spotted sandpiper. And once you get the bill to as long as their head, then you get some of these larger sandpipers like solitary, lesser yellow legs. And once you get these bill larger than the head, then you're looking at like the greater yellow legs, dowitchers, and willets. The curvature of the bill also is very important, especially with looking at these little confusing peeps. Straight bill, yellow legs, semi-palmated, and pectoral. Down curved could be depending on the size of the species, least sandpiper, western, or Dunlins. So color sometimes cannot be that helpful because most do come in browns, grays, and reds. And it also depends on what stage of molt they're in. But leg color is probably the one you want to pay attention to color-wise. That could help you separate species that look similar, like least versus semi-palmated sandpipers. And behavior. So, like I mentioned with the spotted sandpiper, if you see a bird bobbing its little tail along the shore, it can be a spotted. And plovers and sandpipers also have different foraging techniques. So sandpipers are going to be the ones who are kind of like walking and running along the mud flat, beach, or anything, probing at the mud. And then if you have plovers on the other hand, you'll notice that their eyes are really big for their head size. That's because they're more sight orientated, where sandpipers are more feel orientated, where they're just sticking their bill in the sand and hoping that there's something that they find. Plovers have great eyesight, and they'll act similar to the robin, where they'll run, stop, look around, run, stop, and look around. So by watching their behavior, you can even narrow down what species they are then. So range is also important to consider. Again, that there are expected species, but birds don't follow their own rules, so anything can show up. But it's important to know what to expect. But one thing also notice is timing. So certain species, as you can see this little bar chart, this is from eBird, for Onondaga Audubon. Yeah, Audubon. Wow, my English today is not working. Onondaga's eBird bar charts. So you can see pretty much when these species are expected to show up. And certain species, like if you look at the dowitchers, for example, this can be a huge clue to notice when you're trying to decide if it's a short bill, is it long bill, because they arrive at different times. Sound can be helpful. Sound is, a lot of people have issues with learning, and this is no exception. But sometimes if you're out birding, especially like I've gone out on Onondaga Lake, and I cannot see the shorebirds at all, but I'm hearing them from the other side of the rock wall or other side of the trees. So Merlin is a great app. I always recommend it. It's pretty reliable with getting birds right. So have that running, and you never know what we might find. Always save the recording, and you can verify that Merlin was right later on. But sound is also a great clue for certain species like the lesser versus greater yellow legs. These are very similar looking species, And sound can be a great clue to tell which is which. And there's a little sonic spectrogram for each of these. The lesser yellow legs will generally do 1 to 2 note calls, and the greater yellow legs will do 3 to 4 note calls. So, like I mentioned, breaking them down into groups is really helpful to narrow down your options because it can be overwhelming. There is tons of species that pass through not only the county, but the farther you go out to certain places like Montezuma, or if you go out to like anywhere along the actual ocean coast, the number of species will greatly increase. So we have the peeps, which are the calidris. They are the sandpipers, sanderlings, dunlins. The plovers, we have a few species out here. The most two common would be the semi-palmated and the killdeer. The tringa, which is the greater and lesser yellow legs, and the solitary sandpiper. And then we have all other little oddballs like the phalaropes, the dowitchers, the godwits. There's quite a few varieties of birds. I'm mostly going to go over the first 3 groups because they are the most common. And then once you get the hang of the common, then it's easier to pick out and identify these more unusual species that can show up here and there. So first is the little plovers. So I'm sure everyone's very familiar with this guy. This is the killdeer. You can identify him by these 2 nice black neck bands. He also has a red eye ring. So these are a medium-sized plover. And the other difference too between him and the semi-palmated is his bill is quite a bit longer and it's all black. And this guy will be found in a variety of habitats. And on the bottom right-hand corner, I have put in the little bar chart for each of these species to understand when they're typically show up. So as expected, the killdeer is here pretty much all year round. And in some places, even into winter, as you can see, he'll still be found. The next plover is a semi-palmated plover. He is very much smaller than a killdeer, closer to the size to least sandpiper, which is our smallest shorebird. But instead of the 2 bands like the killdeer has, this one has 1 neck ring. And instead of a black bill, he has a black and orange bill, which is really tiny, about third of the size of his head. And instead of a red eye ring, is yellow. So a lot of times you'll see them in this plumage right here, but in the bottom right, we also have a juvenile. So they can range in from this nice bold black neck ring to just a darker brown one. So they have, again, the range in plumage. And they'll show up a little bit in the spring and then from July to end of September. The last plover I have on this presentation is the black-bellied plover. This is a medium-sized, chunky shorebird. Will be showing up around this time of year in this kind of plumage where they have the drab brown or gray upper parts, black legs. You'll notice that they have this nice large eye because they hunt by sight instead of probing like the other birds. So in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see what they look like in their breeding plumage. There's no mistaking them in this one, where they have a nice bold black face mask, which goes down their throat into belly and flanks. Nice, gorgeous bird, actually. So they should be showing up anytime now. I haven't heard any reports of them in Onondaga County, but they should be showing up soon. So the next group is the calidris, which are the peeps or the sandpipers. So this is probably going to be the most common one you'll see around here, the least sandpiper. It is also the smallest sandpiper. They have a very nice warm brown upper parts with yellowish legs. So that can be a nice feature to look at when you're identifying them. But again, if they're walking through the mud, these legs can look brown. So you want to use a couple of these field marks together to decide, is this actually a least? So compared to other shorebirds, they also have like a flat cap-like head to them. They have a medium-sized, slightly decurved bill. So this is, again, one of the key characteristics I recommend looking for. And also the tip of their bill is very thin. So that is it's different than the semi-palmated, which I'm going over next. They also have nice densely packed streaks on their breast. And you can see the bar charts, they're showing up here many places, and they'll be here until about September. So this is a semi-palmated sandpiper. They look very similar to the least, but they tend to be a little bit more gray toned. They're also slightly bigger, so when they're in a mixed flock, it's more obvious than if they were in their two separate groups. They also have a shorter bill. The end of their bill is more of a blunt tip and it's straight. So that's a nice way to tell them apart from least. They also have less streaking on their breast, so which gives them an overall more white belly than a least. They also have black legs. This is another very common shorebird that you find around the central New York. Pectoral is a little bit more rare. Their main time of passing through is not quite hit yet. That'll be around September, but these are very, very similar looking to least, but they're much bigger. They also have those nice brown, more upper parts. They're more elongated. They're a more long distance migrant than least. They also have yellow legs, and their bill is slightly decurved with an orange base. And one key characteristic when I look for these guys is this brown on their breast is strongly demarcated where it meets the white on their belly. So that's a very obvious line that they'll have there. So that's a nice characteristic to look for. Sanderling, it's less common unless you go to one of the Great Lakes, the shores of the Great Lakes. They like nice open sandy beaches. So if you go to the ocean, you'll be seeing tons of these guys. But in central New York area, they're not very common unless you go to lakes. They are another gray shorebird. They're quite a bit bigger than the semi-palmated. And one of the first things you'll notice about these guys this time of year is that there is a lot of white on this bird. You have the nice white eye line, you have the nice white cheek, throat, and belly. So that would be probably the first thing you'll notice. They also have a nice thick straight black bill and black legs. And an interesting characteristic about them is they have no hind toe. I don't know if I can't really tell them, but like other birds, they have this hind toe. Sanderlings do not. So if you're confused if it's a semi-palmated or a sanderling, look for that little toe because the sanderlings lack that feature. And these birds are not quite showing up yet, but hopefully they will be soon showing up at some parts of Onondaga County any week now. Dunlin. These again, they'll be showing up at the end of September. These are more late migrants. These are a very chunky, round, footballish looking shorebird. This time of year, they're in their nice, dull, drab, basic plumage where they're all brownish gray, not much marking to them, white belly, black legs. But this long decurved bill is a great field mark for them. And they're small bird, but they're still a bit bigger than least and semi-palmated. But in the spring, they're nice to see because we look in the bottom right corner, this is them in their alternate plumage. So they have a nice dark black belly, nice rufous tones to their back and scapulars. They're a gorgeous bird to see in the spring. But unfortunately, this time of year, they look more like the sky in the center. Stilt sandpiper, it seems like it's been a good year for them. Twice we've had one show up at Onondaga Lake this year. Usually they're pretty scarce, so that's a nice change. If you look at the bar chart, it seems like that is right on par to when their main time as they pass through. These are a nice elongated sandpiper, more similar to like the tringa or the yellow legs. They're nice long legs, long bill, which is slightly decurved, but that bold white eye line is going to be a nice distinguishing feature between those other yellow legs. They have a gray-brown upper parts with white belly with quite a bit of streaking. And they are close to the size of a pectoral dun. And this is one of our more rare migrants in this area, the white rump sandpiper. So they are named from as you would guess, the white rump they have, which can really only be seen when they're flying around. So when they're just foraging or feeding, that's not going to be very helpful. They are a little bit larger than a semi-palmated, and one characteristics that really want to pay attention to is this nice white eye line that'll help separate them. They also have a longer bill that's straighter, and sometimes depending on the individual, there may be some orange or red at the base of their bill. These are also a long distance migrant, so their primary feathers go past their tail, which gives them more like elongated appearance. These are getting more rare species, and their peak period that they're going to show up in Onondaga County is mid-October. Another rare shorebird we get that pass through here is the western sandpiper. As you guess, they're more of a western half of the country species, but they do routinely end up over on the East Coast. So some are helpful and they still have that nice rusty scapulars or cap, but not always. They have longer black legs. So when they're foraging with other species, because of that, they have these longer legs. They also tend to be further out into the water and deeper water. So that's something you want to pay attention to. If there's a bird that seems to be in deeper water than the others, that could be something different. Like this species is known to. Their bill is also a lot longer and droopier. So that is quite different than a lot of these other peeps that we've been looking at. More close to a dunlin shape and length than the semi-palmated at least. Again, this is a longer winged species. They travel farther distance, and so they have that nice elongated appearance. And they're slightly bigger than Elise and semi-palmated. So this isn't a member of the Cladrus, but because the spotted sandpiper looks very similar in shape, I added them in here. So this time of year, they're starting to molt into this plumage where they're lacking all of their spots. They typically, if you look in the right corner, have a nice bright orange bill, bright orange legs, with all these nice specklings along their throat and belly. But now they're molting into their basic plumage, so they're losing all that. And instead of their bright orange bill, they have a more black bill. They still have their characteristic white comma, which is right in front of their wing. That is characteristic, and their nice bold eye ring. And they will still be bobbing their tail along, so they're easy to identify from a distance. And they're here most of the year and will be leaving around mid-October. So bill length, like I said, is very important. So let's look at these four most easily confused species. So we have the white-rumped, the western, semi-palmated, and the least. So the two common, the least and the semi-palmated, have both pretty short bills. Least is decurved, semi-palmated is straight. And then we have the two rarities, which is the white-rumped and the western. They both have a lot longer bills. So the white-rumped is, again, a straight bill with a nice white eye line, and the western is a nice drooping bill. So when you see these little shorebirds, pay attention to that little beak. Very helpful. So next is the Tringa species, which is the yellow legs. So first is the greater. These are pretty big shorebirds, and they'll have a nice long neck, small head, long legs. They're very elegant looking shorebirds. So these can be very easily confused between the greater and lesser yellow legs. And for this, the bill again is a very important clue. So with the greater, this bill will be about 1.5 times the length of their head. So if you took this bill and you pushed it in backwards, it would go through the head and a little bit past it. So that is great to pay attention to for telling the difference between those two species, because plumage-wise, they're almost exactly alike. There's a few little minor details, like the greater will have a little bit more barring on its flanks, but again, that depends on molt, because you can see in this example, there's really not too much barring in there. And the greater yellow legs also, when it vocalizes, it will do the 3 to 4 note call. And then the lesser yellow legs, they are much smaller. They're about half the size of the greater. very similar plumage pattern, less barring. When they're relaxed, it also sometimes looks like their head and body don't have a neck. So that can be something to try to pay attention to, but it's not always a good field mark, but it's nice to use in conjunction with another. So they also will generally have less yellow on their bill, and this bill is about the same length as their head. So for them, if there's a greater, it would probably be going out quite a bit more than this. And their calls when they're flying is one or two notes versus the 3 or 4 of the greater. They're a little bit bigger than Dunlin, but it's easier to tell when they are next to each other. So on the left, we have the greater, and the right, the lesser yellow legs. So it's easy when they're right next to each other, but that's unfortunately not always the case. So pay attention to the bill length. Do they look like they're smaller? But they can be a challenging species. So the last member of this family, I'm going over the solitary sandpiper. This is another common shorebird throughout central New York. They will have a nice dark brown back, a lot of white speckling. When they're in their alternate breeding plumage, there will be a lot more speckling. And then this time of year, there'll be a bit less. But these also have a nice long thin bill, bold white eye ring, and yellow legs. They're slightly larger than a spotted, but they're definitely smaller than a lesser. And they will be here until end of September, early October. These tend to be in a little bit different habitat than a lot of these other shorebirds. They like more marshy, swampy areas and open beaches and shorelines. So next is, I'm just going over, is the dowitchers. This will be the last group. So the short-billed dowitcher, they are passing through currently. These are a large, round shorebird, yellow legs, and a nice long bill. So this one of the main characteristics to look at when you're comparing the short-billed versus the long-billed is their bill. While you would think that one shorter bill would be shorter, longer, that's not really helpful at all. With the short-billed, this bill right here will end in kind of like a little bend. So it doesn't look quite straight when you look at it. And from there, both dowitchers have a white supercilium. So short-billed it'll be arced a little bit. It won't be a straight line. And then also for short-billed, they're overall a rusty brown color. But this will end right about midway down their breast. So it ends and then it goes to a white belly. So this is a very helpful clue because with the long-billed dowitcher, the red will go all the way down the belly. So curved bill, arched supercilium, and a white belly. And for these guys, this is where timing really comes into play. So they're here from July till early September. So even though they look very similar, you can pretty much guarantee that if they're showing up in this time, it's going to be short-billed. And then the other dowitcher is the long-billed. These are they're later migrants, so they're showing up at the end of September area. So instead of that bend of the bill like the short-billed, these ones have a very straight bill. And then their supercilium also is straight. So compare those. Nice arched supercilium and straight. So again, there's a couple other characteristics, but it depends on when they're molting. They can be hard to identify by the patterning on the scapulars. So those are the 3 things you want to look at when you're trying to identify the dowitchers. So on top of those main species, those were the common ones, a few unusuals, but there's a lot more that can show up. I'm not going to go over all of these species. These are just a small sample of what can be showing up. Reddy turnstones, red knots, The phalaropes, we have possibility of 3 phalarope species, the Wilson's, red-necked, and red. Um, there is currently a Wilson's on Sandy Pond. So they're passing through, and the Oswego area tends to get a little bit more concentration of shorebirds because it's proximity to the lake. Whimbrel are a rare migrant. I think usually they're a little bit more common in the spring than this time of year. Piping plovers are another rare one that they're typically only found along the shores of the Great Lakes. They have left for the year, but they're a nice species that can be found along the shores sometime. Another rare birds are the marbled godwits, the Hudsonian godwits. These are a nice large shorebird with a very noticeable bill. Willets, another large shorebird that can pass through, and Baird sandpiper. This is another long distance migrant, and if you look, you see these nice long wings for their, there's the one I showed the map earlier where they breed in the very high Arctic and then go all the way down to the southern tip of South America. So there's just a few examples of some of the other rare species that could be passing through the area. So where do you look for shorebirds though? Not necessarily always on the shore. Beaches are great. It doesn't have to be along the ocean. It could be along Onondaga Lake, Oneida Lake, any body of water that has a nice little sandy shoreline can attract shorebirds. Mudflats from dried swamps can be great. They are attracted to these areas. Sod farms, surprisingly, these can attract different species I didn't really go over, like buff-breasted sandpipers and a couple other rare shorebirds can be attracted to these nice open areas. And even flooded fields. Been surprised the amount of time I've been driving along and seen a flooded field, pulled over, checked, and there's just full of little shorebirds. So you never know where these birds are going to pop up. They're just passing through, and wherever they see as they're passing over, they'll stop. With some specific locations that are good to check are around Onondaga Lake. On the one end is an area called Marshy Spits that is great for looking for shorebirds. Jamesville Beach, Oneida Shores. I recently heard that both are closed, so that means it's a great time to look for shorebirds there because there's no people scaring them away. Jamesville Beach is nice because if you go to the right of where the main swimming area is, there's mudflat areas, and that's really nice area for shorebirds, and they tend to be closer, so you can get a lot better look at them there. Oneida Shores, surprisingly, even though it's a small beach, we've had some great birds over the years there. Red knots, stilt sandpipers, I think curlew sandpipers. That's surprisingly a great place there. Again, Montezuma National Wildlife Refuge. That is actually a huge area, and a great variety of shorebirds are popping up there. Birds, I'm thinking a lot of variety of species there. A couple places there are like Railroad Road, Wildlife Drive, but those are all great places to look for shorebirds. And also, if you have Merlin app, it has a great feature to look for shorebirds. So if you open the app and on the bottom you click Explore, it'll have this will be your little screen right here, and there'll be a little green location item, and you click it and it'll turn it to finding a bird. And then you just type the bird you want, and then it'll give you all the places it's been seen in the last, I think, 14 days in your little circle of 14 days within a 30-mile radius of where you are. So you can see I typed in least sandpiper. So I can see Onondaga Lake, there is tons of reports of least. Montezuma is the next big concentration of least. But any shorebird or any bird in general you want to find, you can just type in Merlin and it'll give you a nice little overview of where these birds are being seen. So my closing comments are, it can be overwhelming. There's a lot of shorebirds out there. Let's start with the common. Really stare down the least semi-palmated and get familiar with all their different plumages, their bill shape, their size, how they move. And if you just start with these, you're off to an amazing start because most of the species you see are going to be one of these listed right here. And then from there, if you see something doesn't match, you can use those as clues to figure out what bird your mystery bird is. So just get out there, bird, and try to be observant about all their little characteristics. So thank you for joining us. And now if anyone has any questions about what we talked about, put it in the comment or unmute yourself. Thanks.